Ever stood under a sky so wide your secrets felt small? Huron. The world of cowboy stories. We ride the stories of the West campfire, truce, trail dust, memories, saloon, whispers. Gritty human, sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. Founders Night dressed Prospect Ridge in borrowed light. The Summit House Hotel glowed like a lantern set against the black bowl of the Valley oil lamps, and cut glass spilling warm color across a floor scuffed by miner boots. Pianist fingers chased a parlor tune that the wind kept trying to steal through the cracks. The air held cigar smoke and perfume, and the faint metallic breath of the forge across the street. Marion Vale stood at the balcony rail and counted the notes that never found an ending. She had been taught to hold her shoulders as if a string drew them from the ceiling. Tonight the string felt like wire. Gloves of green satin could not warm her fingers. The drafts moved through the ballroom with the same confidence as the men who owned it. Collis Stokes met her at the base of the staircase with a smile that flashed and fell as neatly as a pocket knife. His wool suit shone at the elbows. His ring showed railroad ties carved along the band. "Miss Vale," he said, "welcome to the Ridge." "Thank you." She watched his eyes do their quick work. Age, dress, value. Harlan Voss joined younger and harder to read. He smelled faintly of axle grease under imported cologne. He bowed as if he still remembered practice from a better room. "Your father is a builder," Miss Vale Voss said. "He understands the West. Partnerships. Wires stretched across impossible ground." Marion smoothed the line of her skirt. "My father understands ledgers." Stokes laughed. "The mountains temper a person," he said. "Heat makes good steel." "Or scorches it," Marion said. He lifted a hand as if to acknowledge a fair hit. Then he pivoted her toward a wall hung with framed engravings. Bridges in Vermont. A ship off Nantucket. A wooden trestle that leapt a canyon, and if you looked close, rested on a pier with a hairline crack running through it. Someone had brushed the flaw with varnish so it gleamed when the light struck. "Fine work," Stokes said. "That trestle will open the pass. Goods people news. The right-of-way is the artery. We only need signatures." "Only," Marion said. A waiter passed with champagne. Glasses kissed. The sound rang too sharp. She set her drink on the sill. The piano stumbled. The wind took a note and kept it. She excused herself on the lie of a headache and followed the corridor that led away from the chandeliers. It narrowed wood planks, balm, and unpainted a strip of brightness along the floor where the kitchen door stood slightly ajar. Voices carried from a study to her left. A brass knob shone like an eye in the dark. She moved closer, quiet on the balls of her feet. The door was near shut. The grain had a knothole big enough to offer a sliver of sight. She did not look. She listened. Voss said low and quick, "Ransom Pike is not a patient man." Stokes replied, "He arrives at midnight. He will want the agreement and the girl agreeable." "She will be agreeable," Voss said. "Her father has already signed the proxies. The mining shares travel with her name." The draft along the corridor bit through Marion's gloves. She put one palm to the door frame to steady the floaty tilt of the floor. A third man spoke, a clerk by the clatter of papers. "The trestle is nothing without the pass," he said. "We give Pike the Whitmore stake as dowry, and the rails carve through Ophir like a knife. Everyone prospers." "Vale," Stokes corrected in a soft voice. "Marion Vale." "Right, Vale." The clerk laughed and coughed. "My mistake. Names are fluid. Assets are not. Ransom Pike." The name sat in Marion's mouth like a burned almond. She had heard stories from Boston across winter tables. Stable boy beaten for a skittish mare, a brakeman left unpaid, glass broken just to watch a man flinch. Her father had called Pike useful and then called him something unprintable in the same breath. Stokes lifted a glass. "To order," he said. "To order," Voss echoed. Marion stepped back. The knob brushed her knuckles and came away cold. She drew her hand into her cloak. The satin felt thin as paper. In the mirror that capped the hall, she saw herself a flicker at the edge, hair pinned high, face too pale. She tried a smile and watched it fail. Then the front doors boomed and winter walked in. Snow shook itself free of a fur collar. The room moved in a small wave to greet the new arrival. Ransom Pike did not look like a story. He looked like a sum. Big shoulders, a clean jaw, eyes pale as rinsed glass. He scanned the room as if counting chairs. He saw Marion on the edge of the crowd. He smiled. It did not touch his eyes. She left the mirror behind and slipped back through the thinner corridors where the hotel's dress ran out. The wallpaper ended. The planks showed sap. The heat dropped. She passed the kitchen. Steam rose off a copper pot. The cook's arm flashed with a ladle. Flour dust drifted. A girl carried a stack of plates with her jaw set and her hair falling in ropes. Marion paused. On a nail above a shelf hung a folded map of the county. Someone had torn the corner where the pass sat. The missing piece made a white tooth. She reached up and pressed the map flat. Her finger found a pin stuck into a spot marked Ophir. The head of the pin was blue and cold. Outside the back door, the night leaned against the wall. Wind rattled the hinge, and the faint smell of the forge came and went. She thought of the bridge engraving and its polished crack. She thought of the ring on Stokes's hand carved with ties. She thought of signatures, how ink could move land from one person to another while the land stayed still. Footsteps came down the corridor behind her. Stokes again, Voss with him. She stepped into the shadow between a flour bin and a crate of oranges so that only the shine of her glove might show. The men passed within a yard. "The girl will not be a problem," Voss said. "She was raised for table talk and invitations. She will accept the necessity." Stokes grunted. "If not, there are rooms at the clinic. Exhaustion can look like lunacy on paper. People sign what needs signing when they are tired." Their heels ticked away toward the front. Marion let herself breathe. She drew her glove along the edge of the crate until flour filmed the satin. The piano found the tune again. Laughter rose and fell like river water striking a rock. She returned to the ballroom by a different door. The crowd opened and closed around her. Pike stood by the hearth with his coat half shrugged off. Heat rolled and could not quite reach the corners. He watched her the way a surveyor watches a line on a page. Marion took up a fresh glass only to place it down untouched. She found Augustus Vale's name in the program and traced the letters with a fingertip until the skin remembered ink. A waiter brushed her sleeve and murmured, "Miss." The sound felt like a reminder. She turned toward a side stair that led to the mezzanine. From there, the whole room sat in a square of gold and shadow. On a table by the railing, a copper vase held willow twigs cut bare. She set one twig spinning and held it until it stopped. The pianist missed a note. The wind took another. The room did not notice. Marion did. She walked down into the light and let the cold travel with her like a second spine. Her gloves were powdered white. The taste in her mouth was metal. The string that held her shoulders straight had become wire for a reason. Snow tapped the panes as if the valley meant to come inside. Marion left the gold light and the music and walked the service hall again, a narrow tunnel of raw boards and drafts. The kitchen door breathed steam. She slipped through. Heat struck her cheeks. Pans hissed. A paring knife lay on a floury board beside a bowl of apple peels. She closed her hand around the wooden handle and slid it into her cloak pocket. The handle felt small and honest. No one stopped her. Cooks shouted to each other. A scullery boy shuffled with a pail. The back door hung on a stubborn hinge. She pushed until the night gave way enough to let her through. Cold climbed inside her dress as if it had always lived there. The alley ran black between hotel wall and stable. Lantern glow leaked from chinks. The air smelled of horse and iron and wet wood. A raven hopped along the roof ridge and shook snow from its wings. Marion kept to the shaded edge. Her shoes sank in the first drift. Satin hem drank slush and dragged at her legs. Her breath found a rhythm that sounded like a train far off. She crossed to the stable and lifted the latch with stiff fingers. Hinges complained. Warm air rolled over her face full of hay and manure, and the sweet rot of apples stored for winter. Horses turned their heads. Eyes caught the light. A bay gelding stamped as if to ask a question. She spoke to him in the tone that calms skittish things. "Easy, easy." Her voice shook only at the edges. She found a halter and rope by feel, then a bridle hanging from a peg. No saddle in reach that did not require lifting more leather than her arms could trust. She took the bridle and the rope. The bay tossed once and then lowered his head. She eased the bit between his teeth. The cold metal flashed on his tongue. Her hands fumbled at the buckle. Breath clouded her vision. She led him into the alley, patted his neck, and set a foot on the mounting block. Silk clung to her knees. She went up quick, before her nerve could ask more questions. Bareback felt like perching on a living bellows. The horse swayed warm under her. She gathered a handful of mane and the rope reins. The hotel door opened at the far end of the alley. Men spilled out with laughter. The shape in the doorway stood still. Fur collar, pale face, the smile that was not a smile. Marion put her heels to the gelding. He surged. The world narrowed to the alley mouth and then broke open. She shot past the stacked coal, past the forge where a smith lifted a bar with tongs. Sparks leaped into the snow and died in tiny black scars. The bay took the street in 2 strides and found the hard track that led toward the bridge. The wooden trestle rose over the creek like a rib cage. Lanterns marked the posts. Water grumbled under ice. A wheelbarrow lay tipped on its side. The horse's hooves rang on planks. Marion put her hand flat to his sweaty neck and felt the hammering of his heart and hers. She looked once down between the slats and saw black water moving like muscle. A gust shoved against her shoulder and tried to peel her from his back. She hunched low. The bridge groaned. A crack somewhere in the timbers caught wind and sang. On the far side of the creek, the last houses gave out to cottonwoods and then to open field. Snow lifted off the ground in sheets. The moon hid behind torn cloud. The track she wanted cut toward the dark line of the pass. She knew it from the map, even with the corner torn. She aimed the horse along the fence rail and let him go. Cold locked her jaw. Her teeth chattered an uneven march. The bay blew steam. Drifts rose until they reached the horse's chest. The land pitched up and stole breath. A stand of spruce made a black hedge against the sky. The wind found her wrists and poured itself down her sleeves. Her fingers numbed. The silk stuck to her thighs. Each bump rubbed skin raw. She counted breaths and fence posts and the tiny bright points of ice that clung to the horse's mane. The track thinned to a pair of pale ruts. Snow erased them as fast as she found them. The gelding worked steady and brave, but he began to slow. His sides heaved. Marion leaned forward and spoke into his ear. Almost there. The phrase meant nothing but held a shape her body could hold. The wind rose into a high keen. It scraped her eardrums. Her eyes watered until lashes froze together. She blinked them free with a soft curse she had learned from a deckhand at Boston Harbor and never said in a parlor. The cold found her knees and then her ankles and then her toes and set a grip. Her right shoe slid. She curled that foot beneath her and felt leather give. The shoe came off and fell. She did not hear it land. The bay stumbled into a hole and lurched to his knees. Marion slid forward along his neck and clutched a fistful of mane. Pain flared in her thighs. She tasted blood where she bit her tongue. The gelding scrambled up with a grunt and stood planted. He trembled under her. She tried to set her bare foot on his rib and nearly vomited from the flash of cold and pain. The cold ran up her leg like a poured drink. The world went bright at the edges. She slid down the gelding's shoulder and hit the drift. It gave like feathers and then packed hard. The horse shook freed of her weight and snorted. She tried to hold the rope. Her fingers did not answer. The rope slipped. The bay stood for one beat as if waiting for permission, and then turned his head into the wind and walked away. The rope traced a dark line in the white and vanished. Marion lay on her side and watched snow creep along the fabric of her cloak like ants. She reached for her pocket to feel the paring knife and felt nothing but the deep ache where her hand used to be. She told her hand to move again. It obeyed like a stubborn child, late and clumsy. The knife handle met her palm. It steadied her only because it cut a line through the dream fog. She put the knife back and started to crawl. Spruce crouched not far off a dark bruise in a white field. The branches held snow. The spaces under them looked like mouths. She hooked her elbows into the drift and hauled her body forward. Her knee found a buried rock and knocked against it. She did not hear the sound and felt it in her teeth. Her bare foot stabbed into crust that sliced the ball of it. Warmth bloomed for a breath and then went cold at once. The spruce took a long time to grow larger. Wind pushed her head to the side as if a hand pressed it. She smelled resin and something clean. She dug under the lowest branch where the ground showed brown needles instead of white. So fell from the bough and powdered her hair. She curled into herself and pulled the cloak over her knees. The cloak crackled. Frost had made it a shell. Her chest hurt where the cold had set a stone. She could not fill her ribs. She took small sips of air the way a sick child drinks water. Her fingers did not belong to her. She could see them. They were pale and stiff and looked like someone else's. She pulled them under her armpits and held them there until the sting returned and the pain lifted her spine off the ground. She gasped and let her back down in the needles. Snow wrapped the world tight. Sounds went far away. The wind thinned to a hiss. Her teeth stopped the Sarah mad march. She felt her face. It had the numb smoothness of glass. She thought of the blue pin in the kitchen map. It had been cold and round and certain. She thought of the cracked trestle varnished to a shine. She thought of a bridge in a valley and a man counting chairs. She shut her eyes. The dark behind them had texture soft and heavy, like wool. A single flake melted on her lip and tasted like iron. She curled tighter under the branch and let the needles make a cradle that fit her shape. Snow settled on her cloak one grain at a time until it forgot how to count. The world narrowed to tracks and habits. Jonas Flint moved through the timber, where the pass began to lift snow at his shin's breadth, steady rifle at his shoulder, where the leather had learned his shape. He read the white the way other men read paper. A rabbit cut across his line and stitched itself under a fallen spruce. A fox wrote hesitation near a snare and chose another path. Far off, the wind scraped the ridge like a file. A color broke the grammar, not gray, not dun, not the blue that snow keeps for shadows. A wet feather of green lay pressed into a drift shiny as a fish scale. Jonas stood and looked without moving. The wind rolled a little and showed him more a torn ribbon, a beadwork glint, a smear where something had dragged. He slid his hand from the rifle and touched the green with 2 fingers. Silk. He followed the marks the way water follows a fall line. Under the spruce the shape was small and wrong. A woman lay in the trench the wind had made cloak whiten to a crust, hair dark against the needles, face pale enough to be glass. He did not speak. He hunkered, set the rifle in the fork of a branch, and tapped the toe of his boot against her arm. The arm did not flinch. He slid his bare hand out of the mitten and set fingers to her throat. There, fast and thin, buried, a trapped bird beat the hollow of her neck. He held the pulse long enough to count past doubt. The cold grabbed his exposed knuckles, dug its teeth to the bone, and he did not move his hand until he had the number he needed. He skinned his hand back into the mitten and fumbled with the lashings on his pack. The bedroll of furs came free. He shook it open, rolled her with the careful brutality that saves lives, and tucked her inside. Her feet resisted. Cloth had frozen to skin and to itself. He cut with a small knife, quick and clean, working close to her ankles without touching more than he had to. The blade rang once when it hit a pebble under the snow. Her toes were pale with a thin glaze of frost that looked like sugar and was not. He lifted her onto his shoulder. She weighed less than the pack he had carried up the pass 100 times. She folded in the right places. Her head knocked his collarbone when the wind gusted, and he shifted her higher. He took the rifle in his other hand and started back the way he had come, heel then toe, so that the drift would not swallow his boots. The wind put ice in his beard. The spruce made a sound like someone breathing beside him. The cabin sat where the ground tucked in against a rock-faced door to the south window, small and high so that winter could not find the heat. Jonas shouldered the latch with his hip, held the woman steady with a long muscle of his back, and pushed inside. The air had been banked before he left. The coals blinked in the hearth like stubborn eyes. He knelt, set her on the cot, and fed the fire the right wood without looking at his hands. Light took the walls. Sap bled from a seam in a log and smoked. Snow hissed on the hearthstone and ran toward the ash lip before it thought better of the idea and froze. Jonas filled a pot with packed white from the bucket by the door and set it close to the flame. He stripped the bedroll off her and went to work. He cut away the last of the silk, where it had become more ice than cloth. He did it the way he might skin a muskrat, without cruelty, without haste, with his attention set to the cut and to the thing he was saving by making it. He had a bottle of elk tallow and pine pitch that he had beaten into a salve. He lifted one foot lightly, just enough to see the skin, and packed clean snow around it until she gasped and did not wake. He held the snow until the white went angry and rose. He scraped it away. He worked the salve into her skin with 2 fingers and no pressure. He wrapped with strips of old shirt that had been boiled and hung and smoked and were clean enough to put in a wound. He did the same to the other foot. He did not let his eyes travel where they had no business. He tugged a coarse woolen shirt over her head sleeves, rolled hem long. It swallowed her. He took a breath then. Outside, the wind clicked at the latch, dull and persistent. The pot began to sing. He dipped a tin cup and waited until the heat had risen through the water. He tasted with his finger. He walked back to the cot. He did not look at her face until he had the cup close to her mouth. When he did, her eyelids jumped and opened enough to show him eyes that found the fire first, and then him. She made a sound without a shape. He put the cup to her lips. Drink. The word sounded like an unfamiliar tool used once and put down. She sipped and coughed and tried again. The line of her throat worked. He watched the swallow travel. When she had finished half, he took the cup away and set it on the stool that served as a table. Her lips were gray at the edges, and the color came back slow. Where she tried and failed, the second word sat heavier in the mouth. Where am I? Higher ground, he said. She blinked. Her eyes slid to her feet. She moved one ankle, and a sharp sound escaped her, clean as a chisel on stone. He turned his face toward the window and let her have that pain without an audience. Frost bit, he said after a quiet minute, not gone. He kept his voice even. He kept it steady and low, the way he would talk to a horse that had stepped through a stream bank and found mud to its belly. She pressed her lips together and studied the bandages as if they were a problem she had been set and meant to solve. Her hands were under the blanket. He saw them flex. The right hand made a little fist and then opened again. The cuff of the wool shirt slid back to show her wrist blue-veined and thin. He ladled broth from the stew pot into the same cup. The cabin filled with the smell of elk bone and wild onion and a little thyme he had traded from a trapper who carried a garden in his head. He set the cup in her hands and waited until he knew she could hold it. When it wobbled too far, he put 2 fingers under the bottom to guide it and took them away as soon as her grip found the balance. She drank. The heat traced a road down her chest. He could see the moment it found her belly and lit a small light. She took another mouthful and then another. A drop ran down her chin. He did not reach to wipe it. He let the skin of his face settle back into the place it lived when no one was around to see it. She set the empty cup on the blanket and let her head drop to the rough pillow. The fire threw light. The salve on her feet caught a low shine. He went to the shelf above the hearth and took down a bundle of dried leaves. He crushed a pinch between his palms and breathed the sharp green. Yarrow. He set the bundle back and pulled a corded basket toward him. He took out the thing he had been carving nights when the wind talked too much. It was not anything yet. It had the promise of a bird feather in it if he found the patience. She watched him with her eyelids heavy. Her gaze never quite reached his eyes. It hovered near his cheek where the scar pulled the skin taut. That was better. He preferred it when people did not try to climb into the good eye and take things. She said the word slow with steam and sleep. You found me. He set the carving on the table and picked up the knife. He set the knife down again. Yes. Thank you. He nodded. The fire cracked and threw a small coal that died on the stone. The cabin settled into the small sounds it knew. Sap hissed where a knot bled. The window tapped a trembling twig against the pane. The wind lost interest for a time. Her gaze drifted to the corner, where tools hung traps oiled and set in a row by size from weasel to beaver. A coil of snare wire lay like a sleeping snake on a peg. Above them from the rafters, bundles of herbs swung a dry garden. On the table, his journal sat under a flat stone deer-hide cover darkened by use. He reached to move it deeper under the stone without letting it look like a movement. She closed her eyes. Her face shed the careful shape it had worn even in sleep under the spruce. It went younger and older at once. Her hand crept under the blanket until she found the knife handle in her pocket, and then stopped, reassured by the stupid little weight of it. She let the hand go slack. Jonas stood. His knees cracked softly, a sound he ignored. He fed the fire a spindle of aspen and a wedge of pine. He hooked the kettle to boil more water and cleaned his hands against cloth and melted snow and the sharp pinch of cold that keeps fingers honest. He worked by habit. He put the salve jar back in its place and tied the rag strips into a neat coil for morning. He checked the latch. He did not look long at the place near the door where a beam had once fallen and left a black kiss against the wall. He touched the ridge that ran from his eye along his cheek with 2 fingers and set them down by his side, done with that inventory. When he turned, her breathing had steadied into the kind that takes what it is given and asks for no more. He sat at the small table, took the piece of antler up again, and shaved another wisper of pale hair from it. The knife sang against the curve. A feather began to live in his hands, not because he had set out to make one, but because the antler kept giving up what it was not. The window went grayer in a way that did not mean dawn. The fire popped and then settled. Snow slid off the roof in a soft rush and landed in the lean-to, with a thump that made the goat in his mind lift its head. He listened hard for hoof, or knock, or the shape of a foot he did not know on the step. The only thing that moved was the breath that filled and emptied the room. He carved until the feather found the barbs along its edge, and then he stopped before he took more than he should. She stirred once a small kick that made the blanket twitch and then settle. He rose and laid an old bear hide over her heavy and warm, and stood with his palm a few inches above her mouth until he felt each breath on his skin. He took his hand away. He sat back down and watched the fire work. He let the quiet be full. Morning came in pieces, one bright coin of light on the floorboards. The breath of the stove, a single drip from the eaves that froze before it reached the ground. Marion woke to the scratch of a knife on antler and the warm ache that follows cold. Her feet throbbed a steady beat inside the bandages. The wool shirt he had pulled over her still smelled faintly of smoke and pine gum. Jonas set the carving down and went to the hearth. He handed her the tin cup without looking full in her face. Steam curled from the rim. When she reached, her hands shook. He did not steady the cup this time. She caught the balance on her own and held it until the shaking calmed. He nodded once, a small approval that did not need a word. He set a bucket near the door. Snow lay inside it clean and packed. He tapped about the rim of the kettle, then pointed at the bucket. "Make water." The words sat in the room without ceremony. She eased herself up and over to the hearth with the blanket around her hips. The first handful of snow burned her fingers, a burn that felt like biting cold and then like needles. She fed the kettle carefully, one scoop at a time. He reached over once and lifted a piece of wood, letting her see how it ought to sit so the draft would pull right. She mimicked the angle. He tapped a beat at the kettle rim 2 times when it was enough. The work loosened the stiffness in her shoulders. She swallowed a small sound as the feeling stung back into her fingertips. He heard it and did not turn. He took down an herb bundle and crumbled a pinch into the steaming water. The scent rose green and sharp. Later, when her feet could bear a little weight, he set a block of wood outside and laid a short round on it. He placed the axe across the round and stepped back. The air bit her teeth. Sun cut through spruce and made thin ladders on the snow. "Show me," she said. He studied her face, measuring if the pride ran deeper than the pain. He held the axe up so she could see the grain along the handle, the swell where it sat inside his palm. He put it into her hand's handle first. The weight surprised her, honest and heavy. He stood behind her, not touching close enough for his shadow to fall across her shoulders. "Feet here," he said, and nudged the toe of her borrowed boot with his. He closed his hands near the end of the handle, not over hers, beside hers, a ghost instruction. "Use your legs. Keep your eyes on the heart of the wood." She raised the axe. The head wobbled at the top of the arc. She brought it down, and the blade glanced it off, skating a path that left her cheeks hot with embarrassment. He reached past her and righted the round, his knuckles rough, his breath warm on the edge of her ear. He said nothing. She tried again. The axe bit a finger's depth and stuck. She worked it free and breathed hard. He leaned against a spruce and watched quiet hands in his pockets. His patience was not indulgence. It sat like a level tool laid on a bench. She set her feet wider. On the 4th swing, the steel sank true, and the wood split with a flat crack. The sound went into her bones. She laughed once, startled by the clean hit. Jonas straightened and gave a short nod just once. He picked up the halves and carried them inside. That nod carried more weight than any ballroom compliment she could remember. In the cabin, the day stretched on, stitched with small work. She mended what could be mended of the silk, making it into strips and then into something like rags that would be useful. He skinned one rabbit, and then another, fingers precise, the knife rinsed in melted snow, wiped, set aside. He salted the meat and set a bone to simmer. The broth took on a slick that meant strength. When the ache in her feet gathered like weather, he sat by the cot and unwrapped the bandages. His hands were steady, the kind of steady that comes from repetition and necessity. The skin showed color, now ugly and good. He packed the film in fresh snow and held until she hissed. He watched her face, not to see if she could bear it, but to know exactly when to stop. "Means it is living," he said, and the words had no comfort in them, only fact, which was better. Dusk came late in winter. It crept up the window and pressed at the glass. He brought in stove wood enough for night and a little more. She cleaned the pot after supper, her hands in warm water, her breath fogging the surface. He took the pot and set it upside down by the hearth. His silence was not a wall anymore. It was a room with a door that he would open or shut as the work required. He pulled his coat from a peg and opened the cabin door a thumb's width. Cold stepped in and stood by the threshold. He took the axe and a small bar of soap and the towel that had seen better years. He paused only that and looked at her. It was not a question. It was not permission. It was a mark in the air that could be read either way. He left the door cracked and stepped into the dark. Marion sat up on the cot and watched the strip of space where the night breathed. She waited until the draft pulled the flame and then stood careful on bandaged feet. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and eased the door wider. Moonlight silvered the clearing. Jonas stood by the creek where the water never fully froze. He set the towel on a rock, broke a skin of ice with the butt of the axe, and made a black mouth in the white. He undressed to the waist and then to more. His breath smoked. The scar tissue she had seen on his face did not prepare her. His left side showed the path of a fire that had melted skin and written a map their ridges and valleys, a tightness that pulled his shoulder. It was terrible, and it was true. He stepped into the pool as if returning something he had borrowed. The water took him to the chest. He lowered himself with a hiss that might have been pain or relief. He scrubbed with a handful of snow. the soap only an afterthought, and worked quick, efficient, his jaw set. When he came out, the air put its teeth on him. He dried with the same care he used on his traps, brisk and thorough, then dressed in layers that had been laid on a stump ready. He did not look toward the cabin. He did not need to. He knew when people watched. He let her have that looking, without the humiliation of being caught. She eased the door shut and leaned her forehead against the wood. The blanket held his smell where he had lifted it earlier, something like iron and pine smoke in the clean blank of snow. She went back to the cot and lay down and stared at the rafters where plants hung like upside-down trees. Her face burned in the dark. The feeling at the base of her throat was not cold. It was not fear. It did not ask for a name. On the second morning, she insisted on feeding the fire. He handed her the split kindling and set a larger log on the hearth. He struck flint. Sparks hopped. She cupped hands around the tinder, as if sheltering a small living thing. It caught, choked, tried again, and then took. The glow found her face and put color there. He watched and then looked away. When he left for the line of snares that climbed the pass, he gathered gear without noise. Rifle knife, a coil of wire, the strip of hide he used for laces. He set a bowl of stew near her on the table, covered a spoon tucked under the rim, and filled the kettle to the shoulders. He tipped his head toward the latch. Lock. She nodded. He went out without closing the sound of his boots behind him. The cabin changed when he was outside it. The quiet turned from a presence to an absence. Marion cleaned in a way that made the space more itself. She folded the blankets, aired the rags on the chair back, swept needles and ash into a small pile that smelled like forest and heat. She climbed on the stool to reach the shelf above the hearth. Her fingers found dust and the edge of a book under a flat stone. She should have left it. She did not. She lifted the stone 2 inches and slid the deer-hide journal out enough to open a corner. The paper inside was thick and soft pages stitched by hand. The writing was careful and dark lines, even letters upright, a hand that had been taught and then taught itself again. She read only the first sliver that showed. Smoke too much, cannot see. Clara sings. Lamp fell or was pushed. Heat on the face like a hand that holds and does not let go. She closed the book and put it back exactly as it had lain. Her hands shook. She wiped them on the apron she had made out of a section of silk and hated and loved the feel of it. When Jonas returned near afternoon snow on his shoulders, a rabbit and a ptarmigan strung from his belt, she was at the table tying strips of cloth into a roll. He set the game on the peg and took in the room with one sweep. Blankets folded, pot scoured, chair moved an inch. The way the flat stone sat a breath off center. His eye went there for the briefest pass and left it. He did not speak to it. He made a small space for it inside himself and put no label on it. He set the snares to dry on a line above the stove. He squatted by the hearth and checked the coals, moved a log, made a tiny change that none but him would notice, and that kept the draw right. He took a small bone needle from the shelf and pushed it through a strip of hide to show her how to stitch. Holes first, then thread. He handed her the work. She learned the bite and pull of the material, how the thread squeaked when it was too dry, how it lay flat when drawn with the right angle. Late light thinned to blue. The kettle sang. Snow fell off the roof with a soft thud. She dozed in the chair and woke to the smell of meat browning and onion. He ladled bowls and set one in front of her and took the other to his place at the table. They ate without talk. The food traveled through her like fire through cold wood, turning stiffness into something that could bend. He washed the bowls. She dried them with a bit of linen and the hem of her resolve. When he sat again, he took up the antler and the knife, and a feather grew another measure between his hands. She watched. She did not ask for it. Her hand moved once to her hair where pins had long since gone missing. He saw the gesture and set the feather down, not done, not ready, but real enough to cast a small shadow on the table. Outside, the pass wore a halo of cloud. Inside the cabin, the stove ticked as it cooled a fraction. Jonas stood crossed to the cot and pulled the bear hide over her legs. He did not say that night was cold. He did not say to sleep. He tucked the edge so it would hold. Her eyes closed as if that motion had pulled a cord inside her. He went back to the table and turned the feather in his fingers until the light found the ridge where barbs would be. The room breathed the slow rise and fall, water in a pot fire in a box, 2 hearts learning the same room. Evening laid its blue hand over the pass. The stove breathed steady. Marion pulled the last stitch through a strip of hide and felt the small triumph of work that behaves. Snow clicked on the window like fingernails. Bootsteps came from the trees, slow and sure, then a catch, then sure again. The latch lifted. Jonas shouldered through with the cold on his shoulders and a smear of blood dark on his sleeve. His shirt hung torn at the bicep. He set his rifle against the wall and stood very still, as if not to wake pain. Marion was already moving. The kettle sang a tight note. She slid a pot onto the hotter ring and reached for the bundle of clean cloth. What happened? Wolverine, he said, teeth in a bad temper. He unrolled his sleeve. The gash ran ragged from elbow to muscle. It had bled and clotted and bled again underneath the torn fabric. Sit, she said. He half smiled without humor and did not move. Sit. He sat. The chair creaked. He watched her hands as she set a bowl on the table. She poured boiled water and showed him the steam so he would see she had the heat right. She set the bowl down. His good eye went to the salve jar and then to the coil of cloth. He gave a small nod and held his arm out. She took his wrist careful on the tendons. Heat came off his skin. Blood had tacked to it under her fingers. She wet a cloth squeezed and touched the edge of the wound. He drew breath, not a flinch, a breath. She worked from clean to dirty the way he had shown her with knives and pelts. She watched the red loosen and cloud the water and turn it the color of tea. She changed the cloth and went back in. The cut was deep but clean enough now. The edges were not black. She crushed dry yarrow between her fingers and let it powder into the seam. He watched her face. She pretended not to see. You will need to hold the skin, she said, and pressed his forearm near the wound, as if to show him the place. He held it himself, fingers strong on his own flesh. That steadied her. She set the salve with 2 fingers thin, and even then wrapped with the boiled strips and tied the last knot with her teeth when her hands ran out of length. She wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist and found a smear of blood there and rubbed it off on her skirt. Thank you, he said. The words came out low and round. She set the bowl aside and emptied the pink water into the ash bucket. The scent of yarrow and pine pitch and iron filled the room. She touched the bandage again, a pointless check, then let his arm go. It left a shape in her hand. He stood to hang his coat and the shirt pulled. Her eyes caught the long seam of scar tissue that climbed his left shoulder and crossed the blade. The stove threw an amber that made the edges shine. He reached for the collar to cover it and stopped. He did not look at her. Let me, she said. It came out small. He did not move. That was as much permission as he had. She stepped close. The room pressed in. Her thumb found the ridge where unburned skin met the map the fire had drawn. The texture changed under her touch. There was slickness, then a dry pull where the scar tightened when he breathed. He made a sound that might have been a held word. His hand closed hard on the back of the chair and then eased. Does it hurt? She said. The question was foolish. She felt the answer in the heat that lived there. Always, he said. She set her palm wider, not to heal, not to claim, just to prove that a human hand could rest there and not take anything. Her own throat went tight. She drew her fingers along the edge of the scar, as if reading a line she already knew. He stood inside his body, like a man standing in a house he had built wrong and could not leave. The fire ticked. Water in the kettle found a slow boil. You found me, she said. He nodded. His jaw moved as if he might say more, and then chose not to risk it. You saved me. He took his hand off the chair and lifted it until it hung near her face, then brushed the edge of a curl that had fallen from its anchor. His fingers were rough and warm. He did not touch again. Do not go, he said. It sounded like a fact that had surprised him by being spoken. She felt the words in her chest before she heard them. If there is a road back, I choose the turn. He searched her face as if it were a map drawn in poor light. His mouth opened and closed. He looked down and then up. He took half a step and stopped, held by some habit that had kept him alive longer than wanting had. She bridged the last space. He bent without deciding to bend. Their foreheads touched first in a clumsy bump. Their noses found their places. His breath smelled of broth and winter. Her mouth tasted of iron and mint. The kiss was not careful. It was hungry and wrong at the corners and honest. He made a noise in his chest, a low thing that sounded like a rope straining. His hand came to the back of her head and held. The other splayed across her upper back. He was strong and he was gentle, and could not choose between them. She caught the front of his shirt where the fabric had torn and pulled. He broke from her to breathe, and then came back with less doubt and more heat. When he drew away for a second time, her vision stuttered, and then steadied on his face. His good eye was bright. The scar pulled the other into its old narrow. He looked wrecked and made and frightened. I am not fragile, she said. Not anymore. I know, he said. His voice was hoarse. I have carried you. He tried to smile. It worked only a little. She laughed and did not know why. Relief, maybe? The sound put light in the small room. He slipped his hand down her arm, arm, and found her hand. He laced their fingers and looked at the place where their knuckles touched. His hand was a map of work and old burns. Hers was soft in places and hardening in others. He turned their palms together until the lines met. The stove sighed. Outside, a branch let go its load. Snow hit ground with a soft thump. The world rearranged itself by inches. He let her go slow, not like dismissal, but like setting a cup down where it will not tip. He crossed to the hearth and added a stick of aspen, then a piece of pine. Flame climbed, found the resin, and folded back with a small roar. Heat washed the room. Light cut the corners. He came back. He touched her cheek with the backs of his fingers. His thumb brushed the place where her pulse beat under the skin. She leaned into it. He bent. This time the kiss knew what it was. He lifted her and set her on the edge of the cot as if she were a thing he did not want to drop. He pulled the bear hide up and around them both. They sat like that, foreheads close breath, mixing the heat of the stove on their faces and the cold at their backs, kept out by wood and will. "Do not go," he said again softer, not a command and not a plea. "I am here," she said. The words felt like a plant taking root. She pressed her mouth to the side of his throat where the skin was thin. His hands trembled. He closed his eyes and let his body learn what safety felt like in a chair he had made, and a room he had cut from logs, and a night that had more warmth than it used to. The kettle rapped a little, as water rattled the lid. The feather on the table caught the light, and threw a shadow that looked like a wing. The stove glowed the color of a heart. They stayed like that, and let the heat and the quiet teach them how to breathe together. They broke trail at first light. Frost stitched the meadow. The creek wore a thin skin that clicked against its own stones. Marion wrapped her feet in fresh bandage and wool socks, slid into Jonas's old boots, and tied the laces, the way he had shown her, a double knot pinched flat so it would not catch. He checked the rifle-filled sack with dried meat and coffee, and hooked the latch behind them with a pull that spoke of habit and care. The sky was a hard blue. Steam lifted from their mouths and from the mules that Jonas had brought from a neighbor along the lower slope. The animals blew and stamped. The first mile took quietly. Trees thinned. The sound of a hammer struck the air in single beats far off, followed by the faint ring that means iron on iron. Prospect Ridge opened below like a map. The hotel sat fat in the center, its roof shedding last night's snow and slides. Smoke from the tannery smeared the creek. Wagon tracks made brown scars in the white. Marion felt the old city in her shoulders. She reached over, found Jonas's hand where it hung easy, and took it. His palm was worn and warm. He did not pull away. Their hands made a single fact neither of them said. They crossed the trestle at the edge of the town. Water spoke under ice. Lanterns clinked against their hooks. A boy ran past with a yoke of milk pails that clattered and splashed his boots. The blacksmith lifted a glowing bar and turned it. The hotel's piano sounded a hesitant run like someone practicing in the dark. Eyes followed them. A merchant paused mid-draw on a cigar. Two women measuring calico laid the cloth down and held their own wrists as if to keep from speaking. A miner with a face netted in coal dust glanced up and then away. Marion's back knew what they said without hearing the words. The name Pike rode the air like smoke. The sheriff's office sat low and plain near the livery. A sign hung crooked over the door. Cal Whitcomb looked up from a ledger as they entered. He had a heavy mustache, like a curtain, and a face that had learned to measure trouble before it spoke. "Morning," he said. His gaze slid to their joined hands and flicked once. "What business brings you down?" Her voice found the exact edge between careful and clear. "Sheriff E. M. Marion Vale. I was lost in the storm that struck during Founder's Night. This man Jonas Flint found me in the pass and saved my life. I am here to make a statement to that effect." Whitcomb sat back. "That's so, Miss Vale? We heard different. Folks from the Summit House posted bills, a reward for your safe return." He reached under the counter and laid a handbill on the desk. The paper smelled of cheap ink. A neat script too neat for a miner's hand declared in flourished terms that Miss Marion Vale had suffered a nervous derangement following the loss of her dear mother and had fled care in a state of melancholy. A $500 reward offered by Prospect Ridge Partners for her safe return to appropriate guardians. "Appropriate," Jonas said. The word sat heavy and flat. Marion touched the rim of the paper and lifted it. The ink had smeared in one corner where a wet hand had grabbed too fast. She folded it once, then again, and put it in her pocket. "I am not deranged, Sheriff. I am not a ward. I am here, and I am speaking." Whitcomb held her stare a long beat. He had seen enough liars to know the posture of truth. He nodded slow. Then the door struck the wall behind them, and Harlan Voss came in on a gust of cold with Collis Stokes at his shoulder. Two men followed in their wake, Oates with a sling on one arm, and a feral grin Merrick with a jaw like a shovel and a bowler hat jammed too low. "There she is," Voss said, relief painted so thick it cracked. "Miss Vale, thank heaven. You gave us such a fright." He held his hands out as if expecting her to fall into them. The gesture died when Jonas shifted to stand between them and her. Sheriff Stokes said, sliding to the desk, "We appreciate you taking care here. The girl has been unwell. Her father's instructions are clear. We have papers. Guardianship until she can be taken east for the right sort of rest and medical attention." He placed a stack of documents on the counter and tapped the top one with a finger that wore a ring carved with tiny ties. Signatures in a Boston hand, neat and cold. Marion felt heat move up her neck. "I am not your patient, Mr. C. Do not touch me." She said the don't before anyone moved. Oates still reached. He set his good hand on her sleeve as if he were in a parlor and guiding her to a chair. The room tilted. Jonas's hand closed on Oates's wrist. There was a soft crack like a stick taken the wrong way over a knee. Oates howled and swung with his other fist. Jonas stepped through it and put him into the wall with the clean economy of a man who knows where bodies stop. Plaster dust shook loose. Merrick's pistol was out before Whitcomb's jaw moved, but not before Jonas had a knife in his own hand, the long one that lived in the sheath at his belt. He crossed the office in a stride and a half. The blade found the hollow under Merrick's chin and pressed. A bright well of blood formed where the point kissed skin. Merrick froze, eyes wide and white. The office filled with a sound that had weight. Whitcomb had a revolver in his hand, and it was pointed center mass at Jonas Flint. The sheriff's voice came quiet and certain. "Put the knife down, now." Jonas did not look at the gun. He looked at Marion. Her face was a study in terror and control, not of him, for him. Her mouth had thinned to a line she had to keep with effort. Jonas's chest rose, fell. The long tendon in his neck drew itself into a string. He eased the knife away from Merrick's throat until the point left skin. He let it fall. It hit the floor and clattered once, then stilled. Oates groaned from the wall. Voss found outrage like a coat he had been waiting to put on. "This is an attack in a sheriff's office," he said. "This savage has abducted Miss Vale and now threatens our men. Arrest him." Whitcomb did not look at Voss. "Jonas Flint, you are under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon and intent to do great bodily harm. Hands behind your back." Jonas turned and put his wrists together without being told twice. The iron cuffs bit. They sounded like a smith dropping a tool on stone. He kept his face turned away from Marion. Heat and shame rolled up under his skin and found old burns to hide in. "You cannot," Marion said. "He was protecting me. Sheriff, if you put someone in cuffs today, it should be the man with the guardianship papers and the man who grabbed my arm." Ma'am, Whitcomb said. "You can make your statement in full, and I will write it clean. I will hold these men for the judge as I see fit. But I saw that blade. The man goes to a cell." The sheriff took Jonas by the elbow with a grip that was not cruel and led him through a heavy door to the back. The cell held a narrow bed and a small barred window where snow had caked the edges. The door shut and gave a short metal bark. Footsteps came back alone. Marion stood very still. The heat in the room had turned to a buzz. She set both hands on the desk. "How much is bail?" Whitcomb blew air through his mustache. "High for a man with no property, and for the way he moved at my desk. 500. Maybe 1,000 if the judge is picky." She reached inside the lining of her cloak. Silk gave. Her fingers found the little oilskin pouch she had sewn there. She laid it on the desk and untied the string. A locket of heavy gold rolled into her palm, then a pair of pearls that caught the light, then a diamond in a shallow setting that threw cold fire across the scarred wood. The room changed temperature. Stokes's breath caught. Voss stared. Whitcomb did not touch the jewelry. He looked at her, and then at the closed cell door, and then back at her. "We can hold these as bond," he said. "I cannot sell them. I can write that Prospect Ridge keeps them in safe keeping until a judge sets terms." "Do it," Marion said. "Write it now." Whitcomb pulled the ledger to him and set the handbill aside. His pen scratched. He wrote slow so the law would not trip over his own letters. He pushed a receipt across. Marion signed with a hand that did not shake. Stokes found his voice again. "Miss Vale, think. Your father has engaged our firm to manage your affairs precisely because the air up here is thin and the pressure's great. Do not compound your condition with rash action. The clinic is ready. There is a doctor. The clinic has rooms with locks on the outside, Marion said. Her voice stayed level. You will not place me in them. Voss tried a softer angle. He looked at Whitcomb. Sheriff, consider liability. We are trying to return a fragile young woman to safety. This mountain man has compromised her. Marion turned to the sheriff before his face could answer. Insult with habit. I want a copy of my statement, and I want it sent by telegraph to Denver and to New York. She reached into the pouch again and placed two $20 gold pieces on the desk. One for the wires. I will dictate now. Whitcomb glanced at the clock and then at the gold. He nodded to the deputy in the back room, a thin man with red wrists and a pencil behind one ear. Get the clerk at the depot on the line. She spoke clear enough for the pencil to keep up. Miss Marion Vale located alive in Prospect Ridge. Reports attempted seizure of inheritance and person by partners, Collis Stokes and Harlan Voss, in collusion with railroad interest, Ransom Pike. Asserts sound mind and voluntary shelter with Jonas Flint, resident of San Juan High Country. Requests legal counsel and protection from unlawful guardianship. Stokes's color rose. You will regret this, he said, and saw his remark made Whitcomb's eyes go flat. Stokes swallowed the rest and gathered his papers with sharp taps to square them under his palm. He left with Merrick and Oates limping behind sling-jostled Pride Worse. When the door shut, silence came down. Whitcomb blew on the ink to dry it and folded her copy of the statement. He handed it across. You will want a lawyer, he said. We have one who remembers how. Horace Bell, she said. The name had been mentioned in a bar argument she had overheard on a trip to the Mercantile. He plays cards behind the saloon afternoons. His office is a drawer in his vest. That would be him, the sheriff said, and allowed the shadow of a smile. She gathered the locket and pearls and ring into the middle of the receipt, then pushed them back across so that they sat square in the sheriff's reach. For the bond, she said. Her voice did not fail her. She kept a small coin under her palm, a simple double eagle with wear on the edge. She set it aside. For Mr. Bell. In advance. Whitcomb tucked the valuables into the safe that lived behind a curtain. The lock turned with a low thunk. He wrote another line in the ledger and blotted it. He looked older than he had at the start of the morning. You can sit in the chair, he said, nodding toward a plain seat near the stove. Or you can go hire your lawyer. The door to the cell will stay locked until I have the bond filed with the clerk. No man leaves on promises in this office. Marion nodded once. She put the folded statement into the lining of her cloak where the pouch had been. She looked at the cell door and the seam of light along the floor beneath it. She could feel Jonas on the other side the way a hand feels heat through wood. Her right hand found her left and clasped it for a breath. Then she let go. I will return, she said to Whitcomb. I expect you will, he said. Outside, Prospect Ridge had collected itself again around its work. The forge sang. A saw bit into a fresh plank with a sweet cry. The hotel put out a new tray of glasses along the bar, and light made a flash off the rims. As she stepped into the street, a boy ran past with a packet of handbills he had not yet pinned up. One slipped free and sailed to her feet. She picked it up. Her name lay there in careful letters, the lie well printed. She folded the paper, slid it into her pocket beside the sheriff's copy of her own truth, and walked toward the saloon where the lawyer kept a bar stool as his desk. The cell door opened with a sound like a bucket setting into a well. Jonas stepped into the office. Whitcomb slid his knife across the desk with 2 fingers and a look that said, "Mind yourself." The sheriff nodded at the ledger, at the neat line that held the bond at the safe, where the jewelry slept under steel. Your bail is filed, Whitcomb said. You miss a court day and I will hunt you myself. Jonas picked up the knife. It fit his palm like something that had been there before he had hands. He did not meet the sheriff's eye. Shame sat in his throat and would not swallow. Out on the boardwalk the day held a hard shine. Snow had been shoveled into walls along the street. The sun made knives out of the drips. Jonas blinked and found the seam he needed to walk. Marion came out of the Mercantile with a paper bundle hugged to her ribs. Flour dust streaked her sleeve. A box of cartridges showed under her cloak, brass bright as a dare. She saw him and her face broke and mended at once. You are free, she said. He took her arm and drew her into the narrow cut between the Mercantile and the saloon, away from the street, away from the eyes. The alley smelled of beer coal and orange peel. A plank leaned against the wall with a split that made a crooked mouth. You should not have, he said. The words were rough rope. I did. He put his hand against the brick beside her head, not touching her. He felt the scrape through his skin. Bail is a price, he said. You paid it. You own what you bought. That is what they will say. You brought a mountain dog down to town and bought him a chain. Her chin lifted. Then I bought you a key. He shook his head. He could not hold the kindness of the word. I am not clean money, and I am not a tame thing. I cannot stand in their rooms. He looked down at his hands. They were cut and nicked and honest. He made a fist and let it go. I am going back up the slope. You can breathe here. You can be safe. Safe, she said. The sound quieted like a closed door. She stepped out from the wall and stood where the light cut past him and made steam from her breath. If you go now, they win. They pin your name to whatever they like. Savage, kidnapper. She took his wrist and turned his hand palm up. Her thumb found the crease where heat lives. They make me a mad woman with a keeper. She pressed her palm to his. I am not. He pulled his hand away as if the touch scalded. His voice pressed hard. Look at me. Look at my face. You are silken books. You have a name. I am a burned thing that walks. I ruin a room by standing in it. She did not step back. She reached and took a fistful of the front of his shirt where it had been stitched that morning. The stitches popped. She tugged him out of the alley and into the glare. The street saw them. Prospect Ridge held its breath. A teamster froze with the reins in his hands. A woman with a basket forgot to pass a coin. On the Summit House balcony, a man in a fur collar leaned his elbow on the rail and showed his teeth to no one. Stokes and Voss watched from the saloon doorway, faces slick with something too thin for concern. Marion stood on her toes. The paper bundle slid to the snow and split. Flour leaked around her boots. She set her hands on either side of Jonas's jaw, one on the scar and one on the skin that had never known flame, and brought his face down to hers. The kiss was not a secret. It was a bell rung in clear air. The sound in the street changed. It bent. Men made that soft cough of surprise that they think is private. A girl laughed and then clapped her hand over her mouth. Somewhere a horse stamped and shook its bridle so that the bit chimed. Jonas did not move for a heartbeat. He had learned not to startle. He had learned to freeze. Then the habits that had kept him alive for a decade lost their grip. He put his arms around her and lifted her a few inches off the ground to get the angle right. She was warm and not light. He was careful and not gentle. The town could watch all day. He set her back down. Her eyes were wet without tears. Her mouth had a red bloom like a rose had thought about growing in winter and then decided to try. He took a breath that felt like it might break him. Someone swore in the saloon doorway. Glass clinked. The blacksmith across the way let his hammer hang and stood with his head tipped as if listening for the next beat of a tune that had changed. Mrs. Keating stood on her boarding house steps with a broom in her oats and the look of a woman who had been waiting a long time to see something worth the wait. She did not smile. Her mouth softened, and so did the line between her brows. Stokes found a preacher's tone. This display is indecent, he said to no one in particular, and everyone at once. It proves how compromised she is. Sheriff Whitcomb leaned in his doorway and hooked his thumbs in his belt. He cleared his throat in a way that said he had not heard. The deputy looked at his boots. Marion stooped and gathered the torn paper and the bag of bullets and the box of coffee. Jonas took the flower that had split and held it like a sleeping cat, one hand at the bottom, one steadying the side. They stood there in the center of the street, a breath too long. The world had to settle around the shape they had made. Jonas felt the town on his skin. He felt heat rise up from the shame that had kept him quiet for years, then pass through to something else. He looked at Marion, and the something else steadied. She had laid her claim as clear as any iron brand. He did not have a word for what that meant. He did not need one. He leaned down and spoke into the space that existed between her ear and the world. Are you certain? Yes. He straightened. He adjusted the flower on his shoulder. He looked at the sheriff. I will not run, he said. Whitcomb nodded once. His mustache hid any other answer he might have had. Court sets when the circuit judge gets through the canyon, he said. A week or a month. The world moves slow on paper. He looked at Stokes and Voss and then passed them to the fur collar on the balcony, as if to say he had taken attendance. Marion and Jonas turned together. They walked toward Mrs. Keating's steps. The crowd parted without being asked. That felt like a kind of respect or a kind of curiosity. The difference would be measured later. On the porch, Marion set the coffee and cartridges on a bench and brushed flour from her skirt with a quick hand. Jonas passed the sack to her. Their fingers met along the bottom. The contact was small and loud. She looked up at him, and the look said exactly as much as needed. Inside, the hallway smelled of soap, clean boards, and stew that had been kept warm. Mrs. Keating led them to a room with a window that caught the street. She set a pitcher of water on the washstand and a towel folded on top. She kept her eyes on the pitcher and the towel while she spoke. You may have the front room for as long as you can pay by the week, she said. And you may leave by the back stairs if you mean to avoid the talkers. I have no interest in talkers. They break plates. Thank you, Marion said. Mrs. Keating lifted her broom and went out. Her steps thumped down the hall and made a song with the stairs. Jonas stood by the window and watched a boy pick up the fallen handbill and tack it to a post. The lie hung there in neat letters and fresh ink. Next to it, pinned lower and crooked, a smaller sheet appeared. The depot clerk had fast hands. Miss Marion Vale's statement filed. It said no flourish, all capitals. Two truths hung side by side. The town would have to choose. Marion opened the paper bundle and found the bread she had meant to be lunch. She tore it in half and handed him a piece. He took it. They ate without plates. The crumbs fell on the clean floor. He made a mental note to sweep. The boards creaked as someone walked past in the hall. A wagon rattled over the trestle. The sun slid behind a shred of cloud and made the room a little grayer. Jonas put his bread down on the windowsill and wiped his hand on his thigh. I said you bought me, he said. It was a wrong thing to say. She shook her head. It was a true thing to them, not to me. He let that sit in the space between her and the window. It warmed there. He took up the bread. He ate it and tasted salt and effort, and a day that had decided to be a different shape than the one it had been drawn. Down on the street, Stokes and Voss crossed to the hotel with quick steps that tried not to look quick. The man in the fur collar finished his smile and went inside. The blacksmith lifted his hammer and hit the iron. The ring of it carried. The sound had the clean edge of something being made. Afternoon light turned the street to a pale blade. The boarding house porch boards held sunlight in their grain. Marion mended a tear in Jonas's shirt with tiny even bites of thread. The needle flashed in and out a quiet metronome. A carriage rolled to a stop before Mrs. Keating's steps. The door opened on a man dressed in a Boston Confidence dark suit, without a wrinkle boots, without eat. He took the porch in 2 sure strides and removed his hat without bowing. Miss Vale, he said. Alder of Whitcomb and Alder, your father's counsel. Marion kept stitching. Mr. Alder, you found the ridge. We find what we are paid to find. He placed a thick envelope on the rail. Cream paper red wax seal stamped with a V. He set a small leather satchel beside it, the weight of it clear. Your father's apology, and $5,000 in gold to ease this confusion. A private car waits. We leave within the hour. The thread in Marion's hand held for one more loop. She bit it off and smoothed the seam with her thumb. She did not touch the letter. She lifted the satchel and felt what it was. She opened the clasp and poured the coins under the railing. They clinked bright as teeth. Men on the boardwalk slowed. Alder's eyes narrowed, then softened, as if to handle a child. Be sensible, he said. The air is thin. Grief distorts judgment. You have been ill-served by mountebanks and savages. Come home. Marion picked up one coin. It was heavy warm from the sun, stamped with an eagle that did not know where it perched. She turned and threw the coin into the street. It hit mud with a dull note and disappeared to its neck. She took another and another, arcing them one by one. Plunk, plunk, plunk. Alder made a small sound under his breath and lunged to stop her. She stepped back and lifted the envelope instead, broke the wax with a fingernail, and fed the paper to the iron mouth of the cook stove that sat on the porch for hot evenings. Flame licked the edge caught, curled the apology into black lace, then ash. Alder watched as if witnessing a crime. His voice lost its polish. You are throwing away protection. Your father has patience, Miss Vale, but it is not bottomless. The West swallows men. It swallows women and never burps. A man like your mountain, he is visible. He is alone. Accidents happen. Marion let the stove door close. The iron clanged. She lifted her chin. Tell my father I am well. Tell him the accounts he wants are closed to him. Alder's smile went tight and small. Very good, he said. He put his hat back on with a little twist and went down the steps. The coach door snapped. The wheels turned. The coins lay in the mud like drowned moons. No one moved to take them. Jonas came around the corner from the alley with rabbits strung and his rifle over his shoulder. Marion walked off the porch before the relief in her chest could speak in her face. She collided with him and set her forehead to his chest, told it plain. A man from Boston. A letter burned. Money in the street. A threat like a hand on a knife under a coat. Jonas's face sealed. The quiet turned hard. His eye cut to the mouth of the alley. The carriage had not reached the corner before 2 bodies slid from the shadow. Oates with a club in his good hand sling filthy from the last time. Merrick with a pistol and a grin that did not know the word law. Lady Merrick called his voice sweet. Mr. Alder has concerns. We are here to persuade. Jonas stepped a half pace in front of Marion. Go inside, he said, not loud. Lock the door. No, she said. Go. The club came first, a rush with a shout to make it bigger. Jonas let the shout break against him, turned his shoulder, caught Oates by the wrist, and spun him into the porch post. The post took the hit with a dull thud. Oates folded and slid to the boards, breath gone. Merrick raised the pistol. Jonas crossed the space in 2 quick strides. He hit Merrick's wrist with the edge of his hand. The shot went wide and upward, a violent bang that punched a hole through the cloud and scattered birds. Jonas caught the pistol as it fell and flung it under the porch where the dark took it. He drove his other hand into Merrick's throat with enough force to fold him and then set his fist into Merrick's face where it would change his mind about this day. Once, twice, 3 times. The sounds were meat and bone and a small spray of blood that dotted the white rail. The street held stillness as if it belonged to weather. Jonas stopped. He stood above Merrick, saw, and breathed like a man who has carried too much on a hard climb. He looked down at his knuckles. Blood ran from cuts that opened like old words. He did not take another swing. Marion moved. She took him by the arm and pulled him inside and shut the boarding house door. The latch clicked. Mrs. Keating stepped back just enough to make space and put a basin on the kitchen table. Marion filled it from the kettle and the jug. The water went pink under the first rinse. Jonas sat because she pushed down on his shoulder and not because he wanted to sit. Let me see, she said. He held his hands out. His palms were raw where skin had gone thin from work and split from force. The smell of iron and pine pitch from earlier mixed with the copper warmth of fresh blood. She cleaned each cut. She blew on one without thinking and sent a small shiver across his entire body. He let out a breath that trembled. It did not sound like pain. You could have killed him, she said. She did not look up. Yes, you did not. His mouth made something like a smile and failed halfway. She wrapped his hands in clean linen and tied the knots neat. He watched her mouth as she bit off the ends and tucked them flat. Her hair had come loose at the temple. He lifted his bandaged knuckles and pushed a curl back with a comical care that made her laugh once, a sound that made Mrs. Keating's eyes soften in the doorway. Marion's breath hitched and steadied. She set both hands on the table beside his. The wood was warm. Her voice was not loud. I am not going back. I am not a ward, and I am not for sale. If I stay with you, it is not charity. He swallowed. His throat worked. Say it. I will be your wife. He stood up so fast the chair legs squealed. Then he stopped, as if remembering he was in a room with a roof and a floor and a woman who had just said a word that changes those things. He looked like a man half drowned who has found a rock. A slow light climbed his face. It reached his good eye at last. I have no ring, he said, as if presenting a failing that might undo the truth she had offered. I do not want one from town, she said. I have what I need. She touched the shirt where her collarbone showed. His shirt on her. The room breathed with them. They did not tell the town. They did not tell the hotel or the men who liked printed words better than spoken ones. They went to the bank because paper has its uses when you need it to guard your back. The teller at the Prospect Ridge Bank wore a green eyeshade and fear. He counted the drafts she slid across that would start something bigger than the room. He blinked when Horace Bell set his elbows on the counter and said, Trust to signatories, purpose to aid women, seeking lawful relief from men who mistake ownership for marriage. The pen scratched. The bank manager signed because there was money and because the sheriff had begun to stand in doorways at the right times. They went to the land office where a wall map had the county in neat squares. The clerk chewed a pencil. Marion wore a plain coat and gave a plain name, M. Keating. She put a finger on a square of high ground that miners had abandoned when the vein pinched. The clerk looked up confused. That ground is poor, he said. It is enough, she said. She paid in coin that was dull from many hands and bills that smelled faintly of tobacco. The clerk pulled a deed book with a cracked spine. He wrote. He sanded the wet ink. He blew. He tore the page and handed it to her. She folded the paper and set it in her coat where she could feel it against her ribs. Dead Colt. Claim, the title said in a hand that did not know what it had named. At Horace Bell's small desk behind the saloon, the lawyer's breath smelled like whiskey and victory. He read the trust papers aloud in a voice that tried to be grand and managed decent. He underlined the words relief and safe passage until the ink feathered. He banged his empty glass on the table to serve as a seal. Marion smiled and left 2 coins and a folded note that told the clerk at the Telegraph to send 1 wire to Denver and 1 to New York with a line that would make an editor sit up. They stepped back into the air. The town had changed and had not. Men still swung hammers, anvils still sang, but some faces lifted in a way they had not lifted yesterday. The woman with calico set a bolt aside and nodded small at Marion as if to say she had seen a thing worth seeing. Evening drew long. The boarding house window took the last of the sun and held it. In the kitchen, Marion set a pot to simmer and watched the broth go from clear to sturdy. Jonas sat with his bandaged hands turned up and his body set at an angle to keep from looking like a man waiting to be fed. She filled a bowl and slid it across. He chased the spoon with his mouth and managed better than one would expect with mummied knuckles. He finished and set the bowl down and reached for her with dur. He touched her forehead with his and stood very still, as if listening for a far sound. His voice came quiet. Where? She understood the question. In his cabin, she said, there is a book with names at the front. Your father, your mother. There is space. He nodded. His eye closed and opened. He looked both broken and whole, and that was how he should look. He took her hand. He did not squeeze. He did not need to. The stove made a low hum. Someone on the street laughed and then stopped. Snow thumped from a roof. Mrs. Keating passed the doorway and pretended to check the cooling shelves. She saw their hands and looked away. She smiled to herself, a private thing, and went on with the work of a house that held warmth for people who had decided to stand together. They left before the town had chosen what to say about them. Morning sat clean on the roofs. Frost bit the edges of the boardwalk like sugar. 2 pack mules shifted under saws axes, a short plow whose iron shone where the file had kissed it. A crate of chickens complained in soft bursts. A pair of goats blinked and tested the rope, then settled to chew. Mrs. Keating stood on her steps with a folded cloth in her hands. She tucked it into Marion's palm, a bundle of bread still warm, and then stepped back, broom under one arm, as if nothing had happened. Sheriff Whitcomb nodded from his doorway. No words. The nod did the work. They crossed the trestle. Water carried thin plates of ice that tapped against the supports. The blacksmith and his apprentice were already there. Sleeves rolled a bucket of spikes set by their boots. Iron straps lay in a neat row. Jonas halted the mule. He lifted the end of one strap and held it, while the smith set 2 spikes and drove them home. Ring after ring climbed the post until the polished crack they had seen weeks ago disappeared under new metal. The smith gave a short, wordless thanks. Jonas touched the strap with the back of his knuckles and moved on. By mid-slope, the noise of Prospect Ridge thinned to a single hammer beat, then to nothing. Snow showed the tracks of their small procession, 3 lines that broke and healed and broke again. The air sharpened. The creek ran clear and fast where it could dark, where it dropped under ice. They reached the clearing near the cabin at a slow honesty. The roof had held. The door still faced south. Blue smoke from last night's fire rose and unrolled. They set down what they had brought and began the new work. Jonas walked the line where he wanted a fence and set stakes where rock hid under snow. Marion followed with a bundle of twine and tied off the marks. Her fingers went red and then steady. He dug post holes where the earth gave. Where it did not, he set a drill and turned until the bit sang and the hole took it. He tamped each post with crushed stone and earth, then set cross rails. The goats watched with the blank wisdom of things that eat slow. They cleared the space on the high side of the cabin. Jonas felled 2 straight pines and trimmed the limbs with quick strokes. Marion dragged brush into piles and stacked cut lengths by size, small to large, neat in a way that made the eye rest. They squared the logs. The sound of the broad axe made a deep music that held the day together. The smell of sap rose sweet and green. Shavings curled around their boots and then froze. At noon, she set a kettle by the fire pit they had opened from last year's ash. Coffee rose black and bitter. She handed him a tin cup and felt her wrist throb from saw work in a way that pleased her. They ate bread and dried elk. Steam curled from the cup and made the world look like a picture through the rising heat. Jonas wiped his mouth on the back of his hand and looked at the window frame they had carried up lashed to the mule. Glass wrapped in burlap waits without complaint, he said. We should set it today. They set it. He lifted the frame into the new wall while she steadied the lower edge with both hands. He braced the sides, checked the square with a string and a nail, then drove pegs home with a mallet he had made years ago when a different problem had asked for one. They lifted the wrapped pane together. He cut the cord and eased the burlap away. The glass held a slice of trees and sky. They laid it in a bed of warmed pitch. The smell of pine tar bloomed. He fixed it under thin sticks he had planed that morning and sealed the edges with the heel of his hand. Inside the cabin, a patch of sun fell across the table and held steady. It made a square where a person could sit and write in winter and not steal light from the fire. In the days that followed, they moved between the chores the way a river moves between stones. He hunted. She learned to smoke meat, leaning over the small hut of green willow that kept in the right kind of breath. He taught her to read the smoke. Thin and blue means right. Thick and white means it smothers. She watched the line lift into the sky and thin to nothing. She turned meat with a willow stick and felt the heat spark her eyebrows. He grinned quick and small when she yelped, and then grinned back. They tacked a shed onto the north wall, packed it with split wood, then with more. The stack turned from a worry into a promise. He laid out a shallow garden bed where the snow would leave first in the lee of a rock that soaked sun. They turned the soil with a pick and a shovel, and the good piece of iron they had carried up just to bust roots. When the ground coughed up stones, she set them in a border like teeth. They planted seeds for things that can fight cold turnip and potato, then tamped the dirt and marked the rows. He tapped the soil to tell her when to stop pressing. She matched his pressure and smiled at the small lesson traveling through her fingers. Mint went along the edge. Yarrow and comfrey took the corner by the path. Work made a language that did not need names. If he lifted an eyebrow at the woodpile, she knew to look for pieces that would bridge a coal bed and wake it. If she set traps on the shelf, he knew to set aside the coil of wire that bent wrong. They learned each other's reach. In the mornings, she bound her hair high, then lost pins in the work, then shoved it behind her ear. One afternoon, he went to the shelf, took down the antler object he had carved on nights when snow wrapped the cabin, and walked back unsure of how to hand it to her. It was long and smooth polished, until it held a faint glow, the top cut into the clean lines of a feather. He held it palm up, eyes on the floorboards near her boot. "For your hair," he said. She took it as if accepting water on a hot day. She twisted her hair up, set the pin, slid it through, and felt the hold. She touched it to make sure it was real. The carved barbs caught light. Her throat worked. She did not speak. She leaned forward and pressed the slowest kiss to the side of his face that Scar had not claimed. His hand came up and covered hers on his cheek with a pressure that was almost nothing and meant everything. The fence kept the goats out of the garden by habit, and the chickens in by decent luck. Jonas shaped a small box from birch for the hairpin when she slept. He rubbed it with tallow until the wood shone. He set it on the shelf by his journal, under the same flat stone that covered the pages. He did not open the book. He did not need to. They went down to the creek at dusk to wash pelts. The water took their breath and made their hands pink and raw. Grease made rainbows that shattered when the surface broke. He rinsed until the hair lay flat, and then hung skins on a pole strung between two furs. She wrung one pelt with both hands, slipped swore under her breath in a Boston sailor way, and laughed when he raised an eyebrow that said he had heard that word before, but not from her. She leaned into him at the bank. He stood like a post until the shaking left her. Then he kissed the place where hair meets forehead and went back to the work. They met the town again only when the work asked it. Twice a week one of them took a mule down for flour nails, a coil of wire. The general store smelled of molasses and oil. The clerk learned not to stare. He learned to wave them to the counter and to wrap the glass for the lantern without being asked. People found reasons to nod instead of gawk. Respect comes in pieces and wears plain clothes. In early summer, a rider came up the ridge in a dust that hung low. He had a government ledger buckled to his saddle and a pen stuck behind his ear, the kind of man who counts other people's edges. He checked a boundary at the bottom meadow, with Jonas asked questions about corners, then rode up to the cabin for a drink of water. Marion brought a dipper and a clean cup. He found their names in his book and hesitated at how they sat. He looked at the glass in the new wall and at the fence that lay straight as a judge's ruler. He closed his book and tipped his hat and rode off. The dust he made settled on the mint, then shook free when the bees came. The same week a boy from the valley rode hard into their clearing with an expression too large for his face. "My brother," he said. "He burns. He cannot breathe. Ma sent me." Jonas grabbed the pouch of dried leaves and a small bottle of licorice root, checked the knife at his belt, and saddled the mule. Marion pressed a jar of boiled water into his hand. He rode down with the boy running to keep up. In the ranch house, the child lay narrow and red, heat hanging above him like a strange weather. Jonas set yarrow and mint to steep-dropped cool cloths one after another, waited, turned the boy to free the lungs, knocked softly on the ribs and listened. Night passed in creaks and quiet prayers. Just before dawn, the fever crested and slid. The child's skin turned from fire to human. The mother sat down in a chair and cried without sound. Jonas left without taking coins. The boy at the door stared at him as one looks at a story told true. Jonas touched the boy's hair a single brief brush that meant grow well, then climbed back up the path. Marion started a ledger of her own. Cloth-bound thick paper from Denver bought, with a check run through Horace Bell's good offices. She sat in the square of sun. The new window gave and wrote until her fingers cramped. She did not write Boston. She wrote sky and timber and the way smoke lays on snow on certain mornings. She wrote the shape of a silence that is not empty. She put the pages in an envelope, addressed it to an editor in New York under the name M. Keating, and sent it with the postwriter who took beans and letters down the pass. Weeks turned lake blue. They planted again. They lifted the last of the fence rails into place. In late afternoon, they sat on the sill of the new window and watched the light change the spruce from black to green and then to black again. A hoof clattered on the rocks. The postwriter came up breathing hard, bowed and handed Marion a thin envelope and a little check folded inside. She read the few lines a second time, then a third, then put the paper into Jonas's palm. He read slow. He looked up at her with the kind of pride that does not need to say its own name. That night they ate stew that had sat all day and gotten better. The stove wore a deep cherry glow. The hairpin held firm while she laughed at something small. The goats settled. The chickens talked in their sleep. He set his hand over hers on the table, palm to palm, scar to skin, and let the heat move through bone into bone. The creek ran black outside the window and carried stars where the branches led it. The cabin breathed wood and fire and two people whose work fit together like joined boards. The shortest day came with a sky the color of cooled iron. Snow hung on the spruce and thick browse. The creek ran in a narrow black thread, whispering over stones and catching flakes that tried to close it. Inside the cabin, the stove wore a deep red, a quiet heart that held. Jonas set the small forge in the lean-to, where the draft would pull right. He chose a coin from the pouch they kept, for real needs, a double eagle rubbed soft by other hands. He set it in a clay cup and nested the cup in coals until the gold slumped and shone. He lifted the heat with his bellows and watched the surface move like thick honey. The sound there was a low hiss under the breath of the fire. On his bench he had shaped a little steel mandrel and a pair of tongs he trusted. He poured the gold out and folded it on itself with a hammer he knew better than his own face. He did not hurry. He flattened and rolled and curved the strip until it found a circle that would meet itself. He closed the seam, hammered the join until the shine ran seamless, then quenched the band in a pan where water steamed and sang. The smell that rose was metal and a memory of blood. He lifted the ring into the light and turned it. It was not perfect. It held the marks of the hammer. He liked it that way. He took up a graver he had ground from a needle and cut a line around the ring, the shallow suggestion of two hands meeting palm into palm, fingers over fingers. The cut was nothing more than a whisper when it caught the light. He wiped the metal on his shirt and set the ring in his palm. It made the bones feel warmer. Marion had been writing at the table in the square of daylight the new glass gave. The light had pulled away early. She watched the stove blink and listened to the creek speak under its cover. She smelled pitch on the air and the clean, gone-out smell of cold outside the door. When Jonas came in, he carried the room the forge made with him, heat and intention. He stood in front of her and opened his hand. The band lay there like a sun you could touch. "You said you did not want a ring from town," he said. "I did," she said. "I do not want that kind." He took her left hand where the lines had deepened, and the skin had found work. He slid the ring over the knuckle and down to its place. It fit like something that had been waiting. The gold felt warm from his skin. She looked at it and then at him. Words were not the right tool. She lifted his hand, the one that had hammered and cut, and kissed the place where the old burn met the new callus. They ate stew and bread and sat by the window until the glass showed only their faces and a reflection of the stove. The hairpin held her hair away from the steam. He took a small ledger from the shelf above the hearth. The deer hide softened by years and opened the first page where names lived. His father, his mother, a blank after. He found a pen and turned the book toward her. She wrote her name first, Marion Vale. The ink lay black as a fresh seam of ore. She gave him the pen. He wrote beside hers, Jonas Flint. The two names sat together without crowding. They put on coats and stepped into the blue cold. The snow squeaked under their boots. Stars had come out in a clean scatter. They walked to the aspen by the creek where the bark had the pale green of old paper. He set the point of his knife to the skin of the tree and carved a careful letter, J then M. He did not worry about pretty. He cut until the lines found their place. She stood with her hand flat on the trunk and felt the cold travel through the bark into her palm. They stepped back together. The creek went on with its soft talk. They held hands and let the night keep the shape of their vow. Snow hung a while longer, then broke. The days found more light 1 minute and then another. The roof shed in ropes that landed with soft thuds. The garden wore a crust, then mud, then green. Jonas mended a fence rail and set a new beam where he had wanted one for a year. Marion turned the ledger she used for stories and wrote with the window open. The mint outside sent a smell up that made the ink smell less alone. A rider made his way up the track in early spring, saddlebags square as boxes and a ledger strapped behind him. He had a coat with the shine of government and a pen tucked behind his ear. He tipped his hat when he reached the yard and asked if he might water his horse. Jonas brought a bucket. The rider drank from a tin cup and looked around the yard the way men who measure have to look. "Name is Prentice," he said. "Territorial survey. I have your deed for dead colt here, signed proper." He flicked the book with a finger. "I am told folks in town call you Mr. and Mrs." He looked at the names in his ledger at the single line at the blank that followed. "We can register a union if you like. It makes inheritance clean. The pen is right here." Jonas looked at Marion. The ring showed on her finger bright against work and cold. She touched it and then lifted her hand so that the light found the cut lines. "The mountain knows us," she said. "The garden and the creek do too." The book would not make it truer. She smiled at Prentice so that he would not feel he had walked his horse up for nothing. "Thank you all the same." Prentice nodded like a man who did not quite understand, but did not take offense. He set the official page on the table and stamped the deed again for his own peace. He drank a second cup, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and left the way he came. His horse shook its head and blew. Dust rose and settled. The creek kept its rhythm. That solstice he gave her, something else he had made. He had shaped a small box from birch and polished it with tallow until the grain moved under light. Inside velvet, he had cut from the last good scrap of the old dress, cradled the ring when she took it off to work. She wore it on a leather cord around her throat some days, so the metal would not catch. Other days the ring lived on her finger and flashed when she lifted a cup or reached for a child who ran too close to the woodpile. Summer found them. The meadow behind the cabin carried a warm hum. Bees worked the mint. The creek threw song along its stones. The goats dozed with their chins tucked. Chickens scratched with patience and purpose. Smoke rose from the smokehouse light and clean. The fence held true against a curious coyote that tested it one night and left a story in the snow. A small boy with dark hair and eyes that watched long played under the aspen in the late light. He traced the two letters with a dirty finger, careful to keep to the lines. J and M. He sounded them without making a sound. He turned and ran to the porch, and then ran back to draw the lines again, his own small ritual. A neighbor from the valley rode past the fence on his way to ask about the sign of early frost. He reined in and touched his hat. He looked at Jonas sitting on the porch step with a knife and a stick, not making anything, just letting the tool feel the wood. He looked at Marion in the doorway, hair caught with an antler feather ring at her throat on a narrow cord. "Quiet one, that man of yours," the neighbor said. "Good hands, too. Some say he is just a mountain man." Marion watched the boy trace the letters one more time and then chase a dragonfly that did not want catching. She looked at Jonas. He lifted his eyes and they found hers. The look held everything that needed holding. She put her hand over his on the porch step, palm to palm, the old cuts and the new lines fitting. "He is home," she said. Evening settled like warm water. The ring touched her skin when she breathed. The creek went on. The stove ticked as the iron remembered heat and cooled in small clicks. The meadow kept a last gold along its edge. They sat and did not talk. The day made a clean end. The boy came to the step and leaned against Jonas's knee, heavy with sleep. Jonas set the knife down and rested his rough palm on the small back. Marion laid her hand over both. The porch held the weight without complaint. The mountain kept the house, and the house kept the three of them, and the world for once felt the right size. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.